Smart women never break these 7 rules, ladies and gentlemen. There's a simple truth I've come to understand over time. Smart isn't about what you know, it's about how you live. We often think intelligence is measured by credentials, achievements, or titles. But wisdom, that rare kind of intelligence that changes lives, is rooted in behavior. And today, I want to talk about 7 rules that smart women live by, not because someone told them to, but because they start with why. Smart women don't just follow rules, they live by principles. Let's begin. We live in a world where women are often praised for being accommodating, agreeable, and easy to be around. But smart women know that shrinking themselves to make others comfortable is not a virtue. It's a slow erosion of self-worth. That's why they never apologize for having standards. They understand that standards are not about being rigid or judgmental. They're about being clear on what they value, what they will accept, and what they won't compromise on. Standards are boundaries with direction. They are not meant to push people away, but to guide the right ones in. A smart woman doesn't demand perfection from others, but she does expect respect, honesty, and integrity, because that's what she brings to the table. She's not interested in fitting into someone else's mold. She's interested in building a life that feels right to her, from the inside out. The moment a woman lowers her standards for someone, whether in love, friendship, or work, is the moment she sends a message to herself that she's willing to settle. And that's dangerous, because settling becomes a habit. You do it once, then again, and suddenly, you forget what it feels like to be truly seen, heard, and valued. Smart women don't fear being labeled too much. They know that's often code for more than someone is used to. If her ambition is intimidating, if her boundaries are inconvenient, if her voice is louder than expected, so be it. She wasn't put here to be palatable. She was put here to be powerful. Having standards doesn't mean being inflexible. It means being intentional. It means being so deeply aware of your worth that you'd rather be alone than in the wrong company. It means walking away from opportunities that don't align, even if they look good on the outside. It means saying no when it would be easier to say yes, and not feeling guilty about it. Smart women also understand that standards are not just for others. They hold them for themselves too. They set the bar high for how they show up, how they love, how they lead. They don't expect others to give them what they're not willing to give themselves. That's what makes their standards powerful. They don't just talk about them, they live them. And when a woman lives with that kind of clarity and conviction, people notice. The right people respect her, the wrong ones fall away. That's the beauty of it. Standards aren't just filters, they're magnets. They repel what's not meant for you and attract what is. Not because life suddenly becomes easier, but because you become clearer. This clarity allows smart women to operate from a place of alignment instead of fear. They don't feel the need to prove themselves constantly, because their lives already reflect their values. And when they look in the mirror, they see someone who didn't bend just to belong, but stood tall to be authentic. They know that life is too short to live on someone else's terms, too short to say yes when you mean no, too short to be in relationships that require you to abandon parts of yourself just to stay. So they set the bar, not to make things harder, but to make things right. And if someone says you're too much, they simply smile and say, maybe I'm not for you. Because a smart woman knows the people meant for her will meet her at her level, not ask her to drop down to theirs. Confidence is not loud. It doesn't need to walk into a room and announce itself. True confidence is quiet, calm, and deeply rooted. It isn't about being the center of attention or gathering applause. It's about knowing who you are, even when no one's clapping. And that's what smart women understand. They don't chase validation because they've learned the difference between being liked and being aligned. Validation is seductive. It feels good to be praised, admired, and accepted, but it's also fleeting. It depends on external factors, what people think, how they respond, whether they agree. Smart women don't base their worth on those shifting sands, because they've learned that the cost of constantly seeking approval is too high. You start adjusting yourself to fit the expectations of others, and eventually, you can't recognize who you've become. You lose yourself in the applause. Instead, smart women build their confidence internally. They understand that they are the source, not the audience. They do the work, the healing, the reflection, the uncomfortable growth. They face their insecurities instead of covering them up with compliments from others, and in doing so, they create a foundation that's unshakable because it wasn't built by others, it was built by them. When you need someone else to tell you you're worthy, you're giving them power over your identity. Smart women don't do that. They take ownership of their story. They know their strengths. They know their weaknesses too. And they don't see them as flaws, but as areas of growth. They've made peace with their imperfections and don't feel the need to present a filtered version of themselves to be accepted. This kind of self-assurance doesn't mean they're never insecure. It means they don't let insecurity lead the way. When doubt shows up, they acknowledge it, but they don't surrender to it. They keep moving forward. They trust themselves more than they trust the fleeting opinions of others. That's the difference. A smart woman doesn't rely on the number of likes, followers, or compliments to feel whole. Those things are nice, but they're not the source of her confidence. Her confidence comes from knowing her values, staying true to them, and not bending just to be accepted. She knows that popularity is not the same as purpose. She's not afraid to be misunderstood. She's not desperate to be liked. She's focused on being real, and that often means not being everyone's favorite. That's okay. She's not for everyone, and she doesn't need to be. Her goal isn't universal approval, it's personal authenticity. Smart women also know the power of quiet wins. They don't need to broadcast every achievement or seek applause for every effort. They move in silence when needed because their identity is not wrapped in recognition. They celebrate themselves privately, not because they're hiding, but because their joy isn't dependent on an audience. They also support others without jealousy, because they're not threatened by someone else's success. When you're not comparing yourself to others, their wins don't feel like your losses. They're just different expressions of greatness, and a confident woman knows there's enough room for all of us to shine. In the end, smart women don't chase validation because they've already found something better. Self-respect. They've looked in the mirror, faced their truth, and chosen to stand by themselves. And that kind of confidence, it can't be taken away because it wasn't given. It was earned. Red flags rarely come screaming. They don't usually show up in dramatic ways. More often, they arrive subtleth, through a quiet discomfort, a shift in energy, a hesitation you can't quite explain. Smart women don't ignore these signs. They've learned to listen, not just to what people say, but to how situations feel. Because they know that intuition is information, and when something feels off, it usually is. We're taught to give people the benefit of the doubt, to be understanding, patient, forgiving. Those qualities are beautiful, but only when they're not used to excuse what should be confronted. Smart women have made the mistake before. They've stayed too long, believed too hard, hoped too much. And in doing so, they've learned the cost of dismissing early warnings. That lesson becomes wisdom. Wisdom becomes instinct, and instinct becomes non-negotiable. A red flag isn't always someone being outright cruel. Sometimes it's a lack of consistency. Sometimes it's someone's inability to take accountability. Sometimes it's how you feel about yourself when you're around them. Less than unsure, silence. Smart women don't wait for proof of pain to validate what their intuition already knows. They understand that silence, hesitation, or that gut feeling isn't paranoia. It's protection. But it's not just about recognizing red flags in others. Smart women also look within. They're not afraid to confront their own patterns. They ask hard questions. Why did I tolerate that? What belief made me stay? What am I avoiding by excusing this? That level of honesty is what separates emotional reaction from emotional intelligence. Because here's the truth, we attract what we allow, and if you ignore red flags long enough, they become your new normal. Smart women don't let temporary feelings override long-term clarity. They don't let chemistry blind them to character. They don't confuse potential with reality. Just because someone could be something doesn't mean they are. They also don't let guilt force them to stay. Sometimes the red flag is feeling like you owe someone your energy just because they're not that bad. But smart women know that not terrible is still not enough. Relationships, romantic or otherwise, should be safe, reciprocal, and rooted in mutual respect. Anything less is a drain, not a connection, and walking away doesn't make them cold or harsh. It makes them clear, because when you see something early and choose to respond instead of deny, you're not being judgmental. You're being responsible. Smart women take responsibility for their peace. They don't gamble at hoping someone else will eventually rise to the occasion. They also know that spotting red flags isn't about living in fear. It's about living with awareness. It's not about expecting the worst in everyone. It's about expecting the best for yourself. And that distinction makes all the difference. Smart women have learned that protecting their energy is not selfish. It's strategic. It keeps them from getting stuck in cycles that drain their time, their spirit, and their joy. They've been there before, and they have no interest in repeating the same lesson twice. Not because they're bitter, but because they're wiser now. So when something feels off, they pause. They reflect. And if needed, they walk away. No drama, no explanation, no need to convince anyone. Because a smart woman trusts her inner voice more than she fears being misunderstood. And in doing so, she protects not just her present, but her future. Because every red flag ignored is a boundary weakened, and every red flag acknowledged is a decision made in honor of self-respect. Smart women don't need permission to protect their peace. They just do it. Quietly, powerfully, consistently. Comparison is one of the quietest ways we rob ourselves of joy. It doesn't always shout. It creeps in subtly. You see someone accomplishing something great, and instead of feeling inspired, you feel behind. You scroll through highlight reels, and suddenly, your own progress feels small. Smart women know this feeling well, but they've learned to rise above it, because they understand that comparison is not just unhelpful, it's untrue. Every person is on a different path, with different timing, different lessons, and different challenges. Smart women understand that to compare your journey to someone else's is like comparing a sunrise to a starry night. They're both beautiful, just at different times. But in a world full of curated perfection, it's easy to forget that. That's why smart women are intentional about where they place their focus. They choose to measure progress by their own standards, not someone else's timeline. They've learned that success isn't a race, it's a relationship with yourself, and that relationship suffers every time you look outside for confirmation that you're enough. It's not that smart women never feel envy. They do, it's human, but they've trained themselves to turn comparison into curiosity. Instead of asking, "Why don't I have that?" they ask, "What can I learn from her?" They let admiration guide them, not resentment. Because the truth is, someone else's success doesn't diminish your own. It simply shows you what's possible, and more importantly, smart women never assume the full story. They know that behind every win is a struggle they didn't see. Behind every confident photo could be a day of doubt. Social media and surface impressions rarely reflect the whole truth. And smart women don't build their self-worth on illusions. They don't judge their behind the scenes by someone else's highlight reel. They've also stopped believing the lie that says you should be farther along by now. According to whom? Smart women redefine success on their own terms. For some, it's starting a business. For others, it's building a family. For others still, it's healing from something no one else knows about. There is no universal finish line. There is only growth and forward motion and showing up for your life day by day. Smart women embrace their pace. They understand that going slow doesn't mean you're not going far. It just means you're going mindfully with purpose. They don't panic when they're not there yet, because they've realized there is no there. Life is a constant unfolding. And comparison, it only distracts you from the beauty of where you are. They also cheer for other women, loudly, proudly, because when you're secure in your own journey, Someone else's light doesn't feel like a threat, it feels like fuel. Smart women don't compete where they don't compare. They know that when one woman rises, it lifts the energy of the entire room. There is no scarcity in power. There is no shortage of success. So when comparison tries to creep in, smart women pause. They breathe and they remind themselves, my path is mine. My timing is divine. My story is still being written, and they keep going. Not because they've figured everything out, but because they trust themselves enough to keep moving anyway. And in that trust, they find freedom, the freedom to grow at their own pace, the freedom to define success for themselves, the freedom to celebrate others without losing sight of their own light. Smart women don't let comparison steal their joy, because they've worked too hard to find it. There is a quiet kind of power in the word no. It's not aggressive, it doesn't need to be loud, but it is firm. It's decisive. It draws a line between what you allow and what you don't, between what nurtures you and what drains you. Smart women understand this power. They know that saying no isn't rejection, it's redirection. It's self-respect in its purest form. From a young age, many women are conditioned to be agreeable, to avoid conflict, to please others. They're taught that being kind means always being available, always being accommodating, always saying yes. But smart women unlearn that. They've lived through the exhaustion of being everything for everyone, and they've discovered that it leads to burnout, not belonging. So they draw boundaries, not out of bitterness, but out of balance. Saying no doesn't make them selfish. It makes them self-aware. They recognize that every yes is a trade. Time, energy, emotional bandwidth. These aren't unlimited. Every time you say yes to something that doesn't align with your values or your goals, you're saying no to something that does. Smart women choose wisely. They understand that protecting their peace is not optional. It's necessary. They've learned that it's not their job to manage other people's reactions to their boundaries. Some people will be uncomfortable when you start saying no. Some will push back. Some might even try to guilt you. Smart women expect that. They know that setting boundaries often exposes who is benefiting from your lack of them. And instead of shrinking, they stay grounded. Because they're not here to be understood by everyone. They're here to be true to themselves. There's a kind of clarity that comes with knowing your limits. Smart women are clear on what drains them and what energizes them. They're intentional with their time, careful with their commitments, and selective about where they pour their heart. They don't feel the need to explain every boundary or justify every decision. No is a complete sentence, and they use it with grace and conviction. But this clarity didn't come overnight. Most smart women have gone through the phase of overcommitting, overgiving, and overlooking their own needs. They've learned through experience that not every opportunity is worth taking. Not every invitation needs a response, and not every person deserves access to their energy. That learning becomes wisdom. And wisdom becomes boundaries. What's powerful is that smart women say no, not just to others, but to themselves when necessary. They say no to procrastination, no to self-sabotage, no to patterns that keep them stuck. They hold themselves accountable with the same strength they use to hold others at bay, because self-respect isn't just about how you let others treat you, it's also about how you treat yourself. They also understand that saying no today often means saying yes to something bigger tomorrow. Yes to rest, yes to alignment, yes to joy. Every boundary protects space for something better. And smart women don't fear missing out. They trust that what's meant for them will never require them to abandon themselves. So they say no, with kindness, with courage, with clarity, and over time, people learn how to treat them. They stop asking for things that cross the line. They start respecting the structure, because nothing teaches people how to value your time more than your willingness to protect it. Smart women don't say no because they're cold, they say no because they're clear, and clarity is one of the most beautiful, liberating forms of confidence there is. Growth isn't something smart women treat as optional. It's not a hobby. It's not something they pick up when life is quiet or convenient. For them, growth is a way of life. It's a commitment to becoming better, stronger, wiser, not for the world, but for themselves. They know they are not finished products. They're constantly evolving, learning, shedding old versions of themselves, and stepping into new ones with grace and intention. Smart women see growth as their responsibility. They understand that no one else can do the inner work for them. It's not something that can be outsourced. It's built in the quiet moments, the books they read, the decisions they reflect on, the conversations they have with themselves when no one's watching. They don't wait for life to force them to change. They choose it. They pursue it, because they know that who they become is their greatest investment. They also know that growth doesn't always feel like progress. Sometimes it feels like discomfort, like letting go, like saying goodbye to parts of themselves that once felt safe. Smart women are brave enough to outgrow people, places, and even parts of themselves. They don't cling to the version of them that fit in, stayed quiet, or played small. They're willing to risk the unknown if it means stepping into alignment. This doesn't mean they're constantly hustling or never resting. Growth isn't just about ambition, it's about self-awareness. It's knowing when to push and when to pause. Smart women grow not just by doing more, but by knowing more about themselves, what triggers them, what inspires them, what patterns they're repeating, what cycles they need to break. They seek knowledge, not for status, but for self-mastery. They also ask for help when they need it, because they understand that growth isn't always a solo journey. They surround themselves with people who challenge them, not coddle them. They're not intimidated by strong women. They're drawn to them. Iron sharpens iron, and they want to be around people who push them to level up, not stay stuck. Smart women don't chase perfection, they chase progress. They understand that failing isn't the opposite of growth, it's part of it. They make peace with their mistakes and use them as teachers. They don't dwell in shame. They take responsibility, learn the lesson, and keep moving, because they know the cost of staying the same is far greater than the fear of change. They create routines and habits that support their evolution. Whether it's journaling, therapy, reading, meditating, working out, or simply setting boundaries, they do the work consistently, not because they're trying to impress anyone, but because they respect themselves enough to grow. And as they grow, their standards rise, not in a way that creates distance from others, but in a way that creates clarity about who they are and what they need. Growth changes your vocabulary. It changes how you speak to yourself, how you speak to others, and what you allow into your space. It becomes the lens through which you make decisions. If it doesn't align with who you're becoming, it doesn't get a seat at the table. Smart women know that nothing in their life will rise higher than their mindset. So they protect it, they feed it, they stretch it. They know that the real glow-up isn't about appearances. It's about how deeply rooted and self-assured you've become, and maybe the most beautiful part of it all. Smart women aren't growing to prove anything to anyone. They're not doing it for praise or recognition. They're doing it because they made a quiet promise to themselves to never stop becoming the woman they're meant to be. And that promise, that's sacred.